What a beautiful early September day to be walking in the garden. I'm Liz Davey, and you're watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV Norfolk Community Cable. This series of shows is being filmed in my garden here in Norfolk, and we've gone through a gardening season, and we can hear the locusts and crickets now telling us that fall is just about upon us. I'm in my herb garden, and it's kind of a jungle. And it will stay that way. I'm still picking many herbs. I have some Nepetella here, which is an Italian herb, plenty of chocolate mint and orange mint, rosemary, both in the ground and in a pot. And if I decide I want to take the one that's in the ground inside, I'll need to be digging it soon and getting it acclimated to being in a pot and then going inside. The bay and the rosemary, and the bay I'm going to trim back because it's got some very dry leaves on it, but it's bay leaf, fresh bay leaf, and I will take that inside for the winter, and I think it's going to need a little extra humidity, so I'll have to remember that and perhaps put it into a saucer with pebbles in it that I can keep moist and give it some good humidity. I'll be starting to cut things back that aren't going to do anything, and that would include the oregano. I'll continue picking it for a while, but once it turns brown, the oregano and also the tarragon will be cut back, particularly if I don't want them to go to seed all over the lawn. It smells wonderful when we mow, when it does go into the lawn, but if I don't want it to go into the lawn, then I would make sure to take off any blossoms that form on the ends of the shoots. The lemon balm and lime balm are too going to seed, and I will probably have some starts of that coming up here and there. Mint is also going to seed, but I kind of like the mint to meander through the garden, so I'll leave that for the bees and to go to seed for me. Right now we have bumblebees on the orange mint and probably on any of the other things that are in bloom. Garlic chives are in bloom. The blossoms of the garlic chives are a little strong for my taste to use, but certainly we can use the leaves to give a little garlicky hint to any dishes I might want to make. I will not cut back any of the thymes, and I have lemon thyme and a regular thyme, and also I have winter savory. Any summer savory is an annual, and that of course will just get pulled out. It's in my vegetable garden, but the winter savory will stay right here. Many of these will say semi-evergreen all winter, and I don't cut those back until spring if they need it. The same goes for the tansy and the rue and the southern wood. I'll leave those, and if they need cutting back, they're called a half-hardy perennial. And they usually die back a bit by spring and will need some cutting back then. Lavender falls into that category. And you don't want to trim back your lavender now. You can trim off the blooming shoots but after they've gone by, but definitely don't trim back the plant to the ground because it tends to winter kill here a bit on the edges. And if you cut it back now, it may kill the whole plant. It's time to harvest a few things. If you have seeds, things that are going to seed that you want to save seeds, and this is fennel. And fennel seeds are very good in breads. And this is just starting to get ready. It needs to dry a little bit more. But a little of it's coming off into my cup. And these I'll take inside and make sure it's really dry. And then I'll put it in a low oven for a little bit to make sure that I don't have any extra livestock in it that I don't want to keep. And then I can keep the seeds over, add them to breads or any other thing that I want that nice little fennel flavor. Often it's crushed, and you can do that in a mortar and pestle or in a spice grinder. Any of the stalks of the fennel can be picked off and used. Very good with pork, as into stuffing of pork chop, or porchetta. It's very good with fennel. Often the bulb is used, but you can also use the leaves, which look a lot like dill, and you don't want to mix it up because the flavors are quite different between fennel and dill. But basically we're just using up the herbs. Soon I will start taking out the herb markers. I kind of know where they are and what they are, so I'm not going to leave them in all year. If I don't know what the herbs are, I would leave the marker in. But I tend to put them away because they will rust if left out under the snow. I'm going to move over now to the perennial garden and see what's happening over there. The perennial garden's quieted down quite a bit from its peak bloom time, but we're waiting for some fall bloom. I have Boltonia, which looks a lot like a white aster in the back, and its blooms are just barely starting to peek out. There's still a rose back there that's putting on 1 or 2 blooms occasionally. The grasses in back, tall grass back there, is now in bloom. It has a feathery plume. And then there's a little bit of butterfly bush left, which is attracting some butterflies. As I said, that one just flew up, a small one. I'm waiting for this eupatorium to bloom. Again, it will have a white bloom, but its blue-green foliage add to the picture right now. The yarrow's still in bloom, and there will be asters later that are coming into bloom around the garden. It's time to add some chrysanthemums if you wish. They're called hardy mums. They are not necessarily hardy here unless you plant them in the spring. I like to add a few in the fall, but I consider them more like annuals, and I know that when they're gone, they'll enter the compost pile rather than staying in the ground. In fact, I probably won't even plant this in the ground, but I'll put it down in the garden and move it around to where it adds some color to a space that's empty. I've been taking out perennials, cutting them back as they go brown, removing foliage from things like daylilies, which I love daylilies, but they do have their times of the year when I think they're pretty ugly. So I try to take out any of the brown as they turn brown, and eventually it will be gone. I'm also pulling weeds as I go, because if you let them go to seed, it just will result in a problem for next year, which you don't need any more weeds. And so we'll try to pull as many as we can. The days have been nice. It's been a little cooler, and so it's nice to get out and work in the garden and kind of clean it up. I have goldenrod. Goldenrod, this is just a common goldenrod. It's great for pollinators. It does not cause hay fever. Its pollen is pollinated by the bees. It's not air pollinated. In other words, it doesn't go into the air. Ragweed, however, which has a very insignificant bloom and is another plant that is in bloom at this time, that's the one with the pollen. It's all over the place. It travels through the air, and that's the one that causes you to sneeze, not the goldenrod. Because they bloom at the same time, and this one's showier, it has gotten the reputation for being the one that causes the allergies. But it does do a lot for the pollinators because they're the ones that pollinate it. We have a few little insects on it right now. I have pods on the Boltonia, and these I can save the seeds or the pods or both. These would have a myriad of little seeds in them, and I'll probably save some of these to share, or I can start them in midwinter and put them outside and have small plants later on to place in any empty spot. It's a large plant, so you don't want to have too many of them in the garden. The pods themselves are rather interesting, so I do leave them on the plants until I take the seeds out of them. The asters are starting to bloom. This is a pink aster, and I have one that's more purple. You can see this is the bloom, and there are buds all over it. So this will be a mass of pink, as will the one behind, in a short time. Still have a rose that's blooming. This is a late flush of bloom, and that is a rugosa rose, extremely prickly. I do cut it back each year, and it continues to grow fairly large. It has small clusters of blooms, and we're getting the last flush of bloom from that. Roses will continue to bloom until frost, pretty much, but not as prolifically as they do in June. Moving down, the celosa that I planted, and this is an annual that I filled in where we had some bulbs. And this is an everlasting. It feels kind of brush-like. It's a stiff bloom. I could cut some of these for saving and everlasting flowers, but I'll probably leave them here just to add some color beneath this rose. We still have a few buds on the rose that are yet to come, and a bloom back here that's starting to come out. Again, roses are not prolific at this season in New England, but they will bloom. This is one of the purple asters. No, this one's another pink one, I think. But I have purples as well. The sedum is turning pink. It was green 2 weeks ago. It is covered with bees, bumblebees and honeybees. Another good reason why it's nice to have in the garden. It really does encourage pollinators, and pollinators are having a hard time these days, especially with all the people that are spraying. They're sensitive to a lot of the insect sprays that are being used, and unless they're used carefully, you can lose a lot of pollinators. This has honeybees, bumblebees, several different kinds of bumblebees, I believe, and other little flies and bees. There are many, many kinds of bees besides honeybees and bumblebees. And they're just covering it and enjoying the flowers at this time. The lychnis, the little red flower, is another plant that pollinators like, and it's putting on a few more blooms. I deadheaded that one, which gives the value of cutting things back. I've been cutting back the phlox, the blue phlox, and it too is blooming. This is pineapple sage, and I'm hoping to get some blooms on it. It has a long season, and it has beautiful red blooms if we go long enough without a frost. It also has leaves that smell and taste like pineapple. It's edible, but you cannot cook with it, because if you cook it, the taste and the odor disappear. I'm a little jungle-like in some areas of this garden. Things have really grown. We've had quite a bit of rain this year. We haven't had to worry too much about drought. So things have done well and stayed in bloom. The smoke bush has really taken off this year. I moved this a few years ago. It wasn't doing well in the background, and it's really shot up. I'll be cutting that back in the spring. I'd like to keep it maybe about 4 feet high, but bushier. So we'll try to do some pruning with that. Back here I have a butterfly bush and tall verbena. It's Verbena bonariensis, and it's been very popular with the butterflies and bees, as has the butterfly bush, and also the hummingbirds. Most mornings I have several hummingbirds out here, and they seem to be very eager to stock up right now. They're about ready to move south. You won't see any hummingbirds in a couple weeks. They'll have moved on and done their migration. So right now, keep your hummingbird feeder full with fresh sugar water, and also have some flowers that they can enjoy while they get ready for their long flight south. It's always interesting. They come back about May 5th, and they'll leave in about the first or second week of September. It kind of depends on the weather. This is a chrysanthemum that's been here probably 5 years, and it is a perennial or hardy chrysanthemum, because I planted it in the spring and it had a chance to form a very good root system before fall came. I also protect it with a bushel basket in the fall. I put leaves in the basket and put it over. And it's come back now for about 5 years. So it's possible to have mums that are hardy, just not the ones that you buy right now at the store. Lemon verbena is another plant I love very much. and I'm going to be harvesting that and drying some of it. It makes a lovely, lovely lemon tea. You can add it to another tea or just brew a pot with some of the leaves, especially when they're dried. And you can make a lovely, lovely pot of tea with a very nice lemon flavor and lemon scent. Coming up this way, I have one more plant that's in bloom, and that is ironwood or vernonia. And this is one I added this year, and it's a lovely purple. It looks a lot like an aster, but it is a vernonia, and it is a native plant. I'm trying to add some native plants. It's important to add native plants because they support your local insects and wildlife. And that's what we really want to do. We want to encourage things that would grow naturally here. They will be hardier, they'll take a lot less care if you have plants that are indigenous to the area. So I'm adding natives whenever I can. The butterfly weeds, the milkweed, all of these things have encouraged butterflies. And now I'm adding some vernonia and some different varieties of monarda, Monarda punctata, and also Bradbury's monarda, in addition to the regular monarda or bee balm. And these things are all natives, as are the New England asters, and they encourage wildlife and insect life in this area. We need the insects in order to have the birds. And so if you want to watch birds in the winter, you need to have some things for their babies to eat now so that you'll have the birds staying all winter for you, or at least coming back in the spring if they're ones that migrate. I'll be leaving some of the stalks of plants and the seed heads in the garden. The birds enjoy the seed heads, and the stalks that are left are where many of the insects and butterflies stay for the winter. They'll stay as a chrysalis or a caterpillar. And if you clear up too much, then you will get rid of them along with the brush. So I want to leave some for homes. Not every butterfly goes south like the monarch does. The monarch's a popular one because everybody knows it makes a long flight down to Mexico or Texas. But many of them stay right here, and they stay in a form that you don't see, but they're in your garden, and you need to provide places for them to stay. Now let's move over to the vegetable garden. Okay, the main task in the vegetable garden right now is going to be digging up some onions. I planted the sets in the spring. Now it's time to dig them up. And what I'm going to do is just leave them on the ground. And sometimes there's one underneath or not that you don't see the top. And the idea is not to pierce them with the pitchfork. But we're going to let these field cure, it's called. And field cure means just leaving them out for a while. And they aren't huge, but they will provide quite a few onions. I have some of them down here that still have some tops, and these have tried to go to seed. And these, they are not going to be as large, and they aren't going to keep at all. The ones where the tops have died back will keep quite well, pretty much all winter unless I use them. But these with tops I'm going to keep separately because they need to be used right away. Here's another one. So any that has any green on it at all needs to be used sooner rather than later. I've given up on things like broccoli and piracicaba. That's a broccoli relative. The rabbits have done me in. Where they're getting in, I'm not sure. We've beefed up the fence, but we're going to have to make some big fencing changes before next year if I want to grow broccoli. They are really consuming quite a bit of it, and also kale. I've put the kale underneath row cover or ramée. It's a landscape fabric that plants will go through. It lets the sun and rain in, but it doesn't let the rabbits in. And We'll see if we can get the kale to put on some new leaves. I really miss having kale. Every other year I've had a full crop now to use. But I think this year a lot of my kale will come from the farmer's market, unfortunately. I have a little bit planted and I see the rabbits have started to go at that, so that needs to be covered as well. However, I still do have plenty left in the garden. I have flowers. We have zinnias and Mexican sunflowers down at the other end of the garden. And I have a lot of herbs to use. This is cleome, and this just came up from seeds from last year. I will save some of the seeds this year. Hope it doesn't seed here too much. And I can always transplant the plants into the flower garden or reseed some of them from the seeds. These are the seed pods that grow underneath the flowers. Flowers just kind of keep blooming upwards and then the seeds form. I have plenty of basil. This is a regular basil. I've already clipped some to be dried and we're using some all the time. Both Italian parsley and curly parsley. Lemon basil, and further over some lime basil and some cilantro. And the chervil. The chervil has gone pretty much to seed. I could still use some of the leaves of the chervil. It has a nice little licorice scent as well. Not quite as pronounced as anise, but a nice flavor. It's going to seed and I'm using where it goes to seed as flowers. I'm still picking cucumbers and tomatoes and peppers, but as you can see, my Brussels sprouts have been decimated by the rabbits. They seem to stand on their hind legs and eat all the leaves in sight. So whether we get any Brussels sprouts is very questionable. I may just decide to pull them. There are some small sprouts along the stems that they haven't touched. They seem to be more intent on eating leaves. So we'll take a look at those as we go along, and they may be a complete loss or not. Again, we're going to have to find some strategies next year to definitely keep the rabbits out of the garden. The squash, summer squash, is pretty much gone, and that's just as well because we're tired of summer squash, as are most people right now. I did not have to resort to leaving it on people's doorsteps and ringing the bell and running, but nonetheless, when the season's over, I'm ready to have it be over. Tomatoes, I will enjoy until the frost, I'm sure, because there are plenty of green ones. I could even pickle some of the green ones, as I've done in years past. So we'll keep using those as well. I also have lots of dill to use, so right now, and marjoram too. So I will be picking a lot of these herbs to dry if I haven't done so already, and maybe adding to my collection to have them for the winter. I'm still getting beans. The plants are looking pretty sad, but we're still getting blossoms and beans, so we'll keep picking beans as long as we can. One thing we enjoy, and if I have too many of those, I can always put a few in the freezer for winter days. In the back, I do have a few things that I stuck in the ground. The amaryllis bulbs that bloomed inside in December were put in the ground. Their leaves are starting to die back, and I will be plucking those bulbs from the ground and putting them in my garden shed so that they can dry off. And then later on, I can plant them in the pots, bring them inside before it gets too cold, and start watering them probably around December so that I'll have some amaryllis blooms into the early part of the next year. I've planted some other crops here, a little lettuce, a little kale, a few radishes. The radishes are just about ready. There's also some Swiss chard coming that the rabbits don't seem to like. Perhaps it's the radishes nearby they don't care for. And then I have spinach on the other end of the garden. They're both growing, and I'll keep those watered so that hopefully we'll get a crop before it frosts. In New England, we used to get a frost fairly soon after Labor Day. I felt I had to get my plants in that were coming in before Labor Day or shortly thereafter. Now we have an extended period without frost most years. Usually it's in October, sometimes even into November before we get a killing frost. So there is some gardening season left. It is climate change of some sort that has come to New England and other places, but we can enjoy the extra time we have in the garden. Now it's time to go and look at our cuttings and move to the backyard shade garden. These are the cuttings I took 2 weeks ago, and by gently tugging on them I can see that some of them have already put down roots. We'll leave them right where they are and keep them well watered and probably add to them a few more different things from around the garden and see if we can get them to grow. Some of them are more recent and don't have roots yet. But you'll know when they don't have roots because they will turn brown and die. So just keep at it and keep them there and keep them watered and see what we have in another week or two. Eventually, before a frost, these will all have to come inside and then they can be divided. I've put about 3 cuttings in each of the little 3-inch pots, and they'll need to be moved so that each cutting has its own little pot. My window boxes are still growing strong. These are the ones I planted in the spring. I've been fertilizing them and watering them regularly, and they're still doing well. We've had a lot of rain, which has helped a great deal, but many years, if we've had a drought and things haven't gone as well, the plants in my window boxes by now are pretty much gone and ready to be removed, and I would add some small plants for fall, perhaps a small chrysanthemum, aster, one of the ornamental peppers. There are all kinds of options that you can find at the garden center to spruce up your window boxes, and also planters. Again, this one's doing well. We've got blooms on the canna lilies. Even though the leaves have been chewed a bit by the slugs because of the wet weather, we still have blooms, a little bit of heliotrope, and definitely in back some of the celosa that I added later. Again, if I were losing plants in this area, I could add a chrysanthemum or 2, or some of the other nice plants that are available for fall planting. Joe Pye weed is a native that you can probably find plants of as well, and that should be perennial. You can plant perennials at this time. My garden's pretty full, so I'm not adding any this year at this time, but early September, late August is a good time for putting in some perennials because they have time to establish roots before you get a hard freeze. But you do have to keep them watered if we have an area where there's no rain to keep them watered. It's important that they get a good start or they won't make it through the winter. Many of these plants will just be composted at the end of the season. I've taken cuttings of the ones that I'll use in the planters next year. So I'm all set for next year, or will be, and I won't bother taking any of these inside. Now let's move to the back a little further. Shade gardens tend to be pretty subdued and lack a lot of color, especially in the fall. The hosta are all getting a little raggedy. It's the end of the season. I will come out and take off the spent bloom stalks. The latest hosta are just coming out of bloom. They've been blooming for a while. This is a lovely one that's a dark purple, which I like. It does add quite a bit of color. Again, we get pops of color in the shade garden. There's one, though, that blooms reliably in the fall, and that's turtlehead. It also happens to be a native plant. It's the name of it, the official name is Kiloni, and it's spelled with a C. And each little blossom supposedly looks like a turtle's head. So, or a turtle's face, mouth, head, I guess. It's a unique little plant, and it's fun to sit and watch the bees try to get into these blooms because they have this hood in the inner part of the flower. The bees have to do a little work to get to this one, but they do it. And this one is a pink one called Hot Lips. I also have the native variety, just the plain species, that is a white one, and that's over on the other side, which we're going to go over to now. Again, once the hostas start dying down, I will remove them. Some of the other plants will stay, and the caladiums will be dug, and I'll see if I can save the bulbs. I haven't had great luck with it. I love the plants. They come in various shades of green, pink, and white, and they add a lot. They're a tropical though, so they won't make it through the winter here, even the underground parts. So we need to lift them and bring them inside. Any other foliage that's browning up will be cut off. If we do get a real dry spell, I will want to water things like this fern. This is a fairly new fern. It's a small one, and it will need water if it gets very dry. Sometimes in the fall we have a little mini drought. I'm going to come back up by the pond. I've still got some impatiens in bloom and flower boxes. And this is the white turtle head. Some of these blossoms have already gone, but we have plenty of buds on the plant. And it's just kind of a fun plant. I can sit here and watch the bees try to get in. And they do succeed, but it takes a while. Another plant I have over here is called, another shade plant that blooms in the fall, is Caringhioma. Big name for a little plant. Actually, this should get about this tall eventually. I've never had one grow quite that tall, but you can see it has a bell-shaped yellow bloom in the fall. I'd like to see it get 3 or 4 feet tall, but I don't know if it will in this climate. It's hardy here, but perhaps not as hardy as further south. Another garden task that I'll do this week is process my garlic. And I've had the garlic in the shed curing for several weeks. And what I want to do is cut it off and then use the brush on it. And I'll also cut off the roots. Not completely, but just shorten them down. And then I'll add it to a mesh bag. And I'll repeat this. I've got plenty more garlic in the garage, or in the shed, until it's all done. Sometimes you can just take off the outer peeling. Some of the garlic I will save to replant. This is a nice head of garlic. So I might replant these cloves next month. Some of these are a little tough to cut. Here we are. You can buy garlic sets. If you buy garlic from the grocery store, you may not have much luck with growing it because they may have treated it with a product to retard growth so that it will keep longer. But that means it won't grow well in your garden. I know you can get garlic from the farmer's market, however, that you can plant. And each plant, this has 7 cloves. This would give me 7 new garlic plants next year because you divide it and plant the cloves. I'll keep working on this garlic until I have it all done, and then I'll take it into my garage, which I found to be a good spot near the door to the house. It's not terribly cold there, but it's certainly a lot cooler than it is in the house, especially in the winter. So that hangs in the garage for the winter, and I will have garlic to use until about March when it decides to wake up, and then it will try to grow unless I harvest it then and put it in the freezer. The only other thing you need to keep up with it this season is feeding the fish, and then I'll be putting a net over the pond and probably pulling the pond plants out. They are tropicals, and taking them in and putting them inside for the winter and trying to keep them over for the winter. I have fair luck with doing that as long as I'm sure to keep them wet and give them the sunniest location I can. They go rather dormant, but they'll stay alive enough to come back into full glory once I bring them out to the pond in the spring. I'll need to put a net over as the leaves start to fall. We're already seeing a few leaves fall, but when they really start falling in great quantities, I'll want to put a net over the pond to keep the majority of them out. Also need to remember to use my deer spray again. The deer are about. We see them now and again. So far they've kind of stayed out of the garden. I started the deer spray early in the spring and they seem to establish their patterns then. But we don't want them to reestablish fall patterns by coming into the yard and eating all the shrubbery. So this time, instead of concentrating totally on hosta, I will spray the hosta that are near the woods. I will work on things like the holly and azaleas and other plants that I know they would enjoy if they started coming into the yard. Now it's time to go inside and use some of the produce that we can harvest from the garden, that I have harvested from the garden, and make a few things for dinner. I'll see you inside. I'm not quite ready to add all of my fall decorations. It is after Labor Day, and I know a lot of people are already adding a lot of fall things. And can Halloween be far behind? Pumpkin spice has come out. In fact, that started before the end of August. Kind of rushing the season, but that's kind of what's happening. Can Christmas be far behind? I'm sure they'll have the decorations out soon for people to buy. At any rate, I was looking in the closet at some of my fall decorations and decided I needed to revamp a few of these twig wreaths. I like twig wreaths, they're natural looking, but I'm tired and ready for a change. The raffia has all kind of gotten limp. It was once a little more crisp and a little cleaner too, so that's gonna go. And the decorations are still good, and the leaves are still okay. But I wanted to add some other touches to these wreaths. And this one has lost some of its branches, and I will pick off the pieces that are loose. It's been outside for several years. It's gone out in the fall, so it needs to have some pine needles picked out of it, and a few other things. And then I'm going to add a little floral wreath. And this is just a little wreath on a plastic base. And I'm going to put it in the middle of this, and I'm going to have to anchor it with some wire. And this is just what's called paddle wire. And I believe I can just tie one end around the part that holds this little wreath together, and then fasten the rest up through the wreath itself and around it. To secure it. And then I'll do the same thing on the bottom, and probably also on each side to make sure it stays put. I'm just going to twist it around here and then run it through and twist it around. And I'll fasten the sides up as well a little later on, and then we'll add a piece, different kind of fall ribbon. And I want to check and see if I have a hanging part on this one. Well, many of my wreaths do, and they have a place to hang it on the wall. So we want to move in relation to that, either above it or below, and I think I will choose a spot down below. I've made the bow, and again, I'll just fasten that through and around and twist the wires together well. there we have a new look. Old wreath with a new look. And then with the smaller one, I found some ribbon that I liked that's a little different. I think it's quite pretty. But it's brighter, and it would have been just a little too much, I think, with these, which is why I went with the burgundy and gold. But it will look nice with this little wreath. And again, I'll just fasten it around. And I could, if I wished, add a few of these leaves, but I think I'll just put the little candle ring. It's an actual candle ring. You can put candles in those on your table, but I'm using it as part of a wreath. But it does have a nice little ring structure on the back, which I can fasten my wire around. And then just put it in the middle of the bow. And we have to find the end. And I believe my hanger is at the top of this one. Yep, there's someplace. And we'll just hang this one as well. So I have wreaths to hang outside, and they are freshened up a bit. And I also have some things left over that can still be used in other places, either inside, perhaps in a vase with these autumn leaves, and just in with some gourds or something with these decorations. So I reuse what I have, unless it's really in obviously bad condition, as the raffia is, and freshen up a little as we go along. Now let's go in the kitchen and do some cooking. Using some of the fall harvest, I'm going to make some cookies today. These are made with zucchini and carrots, both of which I've shredded, and I have here, I need to check my recipe, yep, 2/3 of a cup each of shredded zucchini, which has been drained well, and 2/3 cup shredded carrots. And we'll add those a little later on. I'm starting with a 1/2 cup butter. Then I'm going to add 3 ounces of cream cheese. And I'm using an 8-ounce block because I'm going to use the 3 ounces more in the frosting. That leaves 2 ounces that you can spread on your bagel. To this I'm going to add 2/3 of a cup of brown sugar. And I'm going to mix that well. And this is the cream cheese, the 1/2 cup of butter, and 2/3 cup of brown sugar. I'll add 1 egg and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. I'm going to scrape down the bowl a little bit. And mix this. When it's well mixed, I'm going to add 1½ cups of flour, a teaspoon of baking powder, and 1/4 teaspoon salt. And I'll mix that in just until it's well mixed. And now we're going to move the mixer out of the way. and scrape off the beater. And then I'll add the 2/3 cup each of carrot and zucchini. And 1/2 cup raisins. These are the golden raisins. I like the golden raisins in this recipe. You can use regular dark raisins, but these are kind of sweet and nice. And I'm going to mix this part by hand. I could use the beater with it, but the carrots and zucchini tend to get stuck on beater blades, especially if you're using more traditional beaters instead of a paddle. The next thing I'll do is to put it into a pan, and it calls for a 9-inch square pan. You could use a 9-inch square, or you can use this little rectangle, which is about half of a 9 by 13. It's holds about the same amount as a 9-inch pan. These go into an oven at 350 for half an hour, 30 minutes. We'll set the timer. And while they bake, I'll make some frosting. Using that other 1/3 cup of cream cheese. I'll add 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. And then we'll gradually, as we're mixing, add 1.5 cups of confectioner's sugar. Get it started a little first. And that's it for the frosting. Now, once the bars have come out of the oven and cooled completely, you can either turn them out of the pan or just leave them in the pan. And we'll spread them with the frosting. These will need to be kept in the refrigerator because of the cream cheese frosting, but they can also be frozen if you wish to serve them later. And we can decorate those with some fall things. And I'm going to move them over to the other side, I think, at this point, so we can see what I'm cooking later. But I would decorate them with maybe a few candy corn. And this one I'll decorate with one of the little pumpkin candies so that you have a kind of fall-looking dessert in these bars. And they're using some of the produce that's good in the fall. The carrots and the zucchini, which we've all had enough of zucchini as a main dish, as a side dish, and now we can use it in some of the baked goods and disguise it a little bit. The next thing I want to make is using a new crop that I planted this year. I planted tomatillos, and they're starting to get ripe. They're a funny little tomato relative, I believe, or perhaps not. They're their own thing. And when they're ripe, they have this papery shell. And all you have to do is just peel off that papery shell and then wash it. I'll give it a little washing. You throw the paper shell away. And then I'm going to be cutting these in quarters to use a little later. And I'm cutting them up while my oil heats. And I'm going to make tomatillo chicken. This is used in southwestern cooking quite a bit, but they do grow around here. And their growth habit is similar to tomatoes. And next year I will put them in tomato cages. This year I didn't realize when the little plants went in the ground, they were maybe 6 inches tall, cute little plants. I thought, well, they'd probably get a foot tall. Well, they've gotten about 3 feet tall. So next year, tomato cages for the tomatillos as well. I had 6 plants, and I've been able to have a moderate harvest on them. They can be attacked by, I believe it's potato bugs or cucumber beetles. And I don't have potatoes, so I have no problem with potato bugs. So I have not had any insect problems with them, and we've been able to enjoy them. They're often used in the green salsa or other Mexican dishes. And so I'm going to be using it with the chicken. And I've got a large chicken breast, which I have cut in pieces. And I'm going to saute that till it's nice and brown. And I'll add some garlic in here along with it. Just chopped garlic. You could use garlic powder, but I've got the real thing. Remember, we planted a lot of that, so I will be using the real garlic instead, and a little pepper and salt. I just want to brown this up. Now I'm going to cover the chicken and let it cook a little longer, covered, and lower the heat a little bit. And while that's going on, I'm going to make the sauce for the chicken. It's not cooked yet, and we'll cook it some with the sauce. I'm going to add about 5 of the tomatillos. I think I have 5 or 6. Mine are quite small. They do have them available now in the markets, and farmers markets have them as well. And then I need to add an onion. And this would be a rather small onion for this amount of tomatillos. And a hot pepper. My hot peppers I've grown out with my flowers on the back, near my back deck. It seems to be hottest there, and they like some heat, and as well as providing heat, they like a little heat when they're growing. So I added 1 hot pepper. A jalapeno would work, or any other kind of hot pepper you wish to use, depending on your heat tolerance and what you have available. And I'm just going to buzz these in the blender or the food processor until they're liquefied. And that's about the easiest sauce you could possibly make. I'm going to add that to the chicken, which is still cooking. And I'll continue to cook it with the lid back on for probably about 10 minutes until the chicken is completely finished. That would be 165 degrees for chicken, 160 to 165. That's the safe range for chicken. So we'll continue to cook that, and while that's cooking, I'm going to make a salad using some arugula, which I picked from the garden. It's gotten a little bit wilty because it's been here in the kitchen, and tomatoes. And this is a very simple salad, and I'm just going to use both red and yellow tomatoes. And these are white peach tomatoes. They are a yellow tomato. I'm going to arrange those on the plate. And then I want to add some of my basil. I'm going to use my scissors to cut up some of it. And I want to use the opal basil, or red basil, on the yellow tomatoes and the green basil on the red ones. And I'm just going to cut little julienne strips of basil. A little of the red basil on the yellow tomatoes. I love the contrast of colors with the red and the yellow. And then I'll do the same thing with some of the green on the red tomatoes. And then I'll add some cheese. And you can add whatever cheese you'd like. I'm using feta, and I'll put it between so people can get it if they want it or not. You could use mozzarella. You could add it between the pieces of tomatoes. You can vary this many different ways. And I'm looking for something I thought I had. Here they are. A few toasted walnuts, and I'll just kind of put those around with the cheese, broken in pieces. You could use any kind of nuts on it, but I like the toasted walnuts. They kind of seem to go with the whole salad. And this will be served with just a vinaigrette of balsamic vinegar and olive oil. 3 tablespoons of olive oil, 2 tablespoons of balsamic vinegar, and I will just drizzle this over at the time I serve it. Now our tomatillo chicken should be finished. And I'm going to add that to just some linguine. The tomatillos have a rather acidic flavor. It's not quite lemony, but it is similar. I'll put the chicken in and then pour the sauce over the top. You get a little heat from the chili, again, depending on what you use. And just the lovely flavor of the tomatillos. This I will garnish with some chopped cilantro. It seems to go with the dish, would be an ingredient in a salsa. If you made a salsa with the tomatillos, it would definitely be one of the ingredients, so it makes a very good garnish for the dish. And it happens to be growing in the garden. It will soon go to seed. I have a few flowers in here. The flowers are edible, so if you serve it the flowers, it's just fine. Okay, so this will be a little taste of late summer, early fall. And I have some flowers that I've picked from the garden. If you keep the zinnias picked, they will keep growing for you and keep producing flowers. And these are not Queen Anne's lace, though they look like it. They are carrots that have gone to seed. And I thought, well, there's no sense just cutting them off. Why not use them for flowers? The carrots will not be good because they did shoot up a seed stalk. There will be no carrot left. They used all their energy to go to seed instead of make a root. But it does make an interesting flower. And it looks pretty mixed in with the others. Thank you for joining me for a walk in the garden on NCTV, and a little bit in the kitchen too, preparing some of the things we've picked from the garden. Today we've used carrots and zucchini, tomatoes, arugula, cilantro, tomatillos, onions, and garlic, all from the garden. So we've made a complete meal just about with a few additions, and a flower arrangement too. Thanks for joining me. I'm Liz Davey, and you're watching NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television.